From FingerLakes1.com, you're listening to Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and today we're taking on the environment, conservation, and much more. Chris Lajewski, a Pittsford native who began his career with Audubon NY in November 2010 at the Montezuma Audubon Center's Education Center, is here. He has had a long journey with the center itself. Chris, welcome back. This is obviously not the first time you've been here. The second time in about 8 months or so, if my math is right today. How's things?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you again. Real busy up at the Montezuma Audubon Center up in Savannah, New York. Snowy Savannah, New York today.
Snowy is right.
Yeah, so we're very busy with snowshoeing programs, scout programs, homeschool, nature series, keeping us very, very busy. But we're also planning for springtime and summer as well. So we've got a lot of planning going on with our wildlife festival, our annual benefit, and summer camps.
Something everyone wants to look forward to, spring and summer.
Sunshine, warmer,
yeah, all those good
degrees.
Things. So, for those who might not have caught the last time you were here, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved with the Audubon Center, and what that journey was like, and what your role is now.
Right. I was always an outdoor kid growing up, playing in the woods and out in the fields all times of the year, and I knew I was going to do something with conservation and the environment. So I got some college degrees, both a bachelor's degree and master's degree here in New York State, and I thought geology and environmental science was what I wanted to do with my career. But after about 2 years in the environmental science realm, I discovered that nonprofits and conservation and working at a nature center was really what I wanted to do. So worked for the National Park Service for a time, a small nature center down in Northern Virginia. The Nature Conservancy brought me back up here to New York State, where I'm from originally. But the National Audubon Society is where I've spent my last 7 years, and really where I see my career going for quite some time, because Audubon is the leading bird conservation organization in the country. There's no other environmental conservation organization like Audubon. Nothing can compare to the reach of our organization, the number of people that we bring into our organization, the habitat, the conservation work that we do, and of course we're all about birds. And so many people here in Seneca Falls and across the Finger Lakes region love birds, and this is just a magnet for bird conservation, because we have some critically important habitats like the Montezuma Wetlands Complex.
So before you jump into sort of reintroducing what the complex is and all that it entails, which it's massive, it's huge, you talked about the passion, and I'm kind of curious, being involved with an organization like the one you are, does that make it easy for you to keep that passion going full-fledged?
My role has changed at the Montezuma Audubon Center. I used to be the education manager. I was on the front lines of our educational programs, working with 20,000 people annually. Now, as the center director at the Audubon Center, my role has changed, but the passion is still there. And that's why I love still connecting people to Montezuma and the incredibly important bird areas that we have in the Finger Lakes region, like Cayuga Lake, Seneca Lake, Canandaigua, and Montezuma, of course. So it's changed. It's more of a grant writing role now, and donor relation and cultivation role that I have, and also ensuring that my educators who I have on staff have the resources that they need in order to succeed and continue to lead high-quality environmental education programs.
Now, walk us through what the complex is itself and all that it entails. It's large. It spans a ridiculous amount of acreage. You brought in the map. We were looking at it before getting. It's just for those who live in the Finger Lakes, and even for those who live pretty close to it, I don't think there quite is always that appreciation for how large and the scale of it and what you guys do on a daily basis out there, even like now in the middle of winter, when you think, oh, what could possibly be happening out there?
Right. The Montezuma Wetlands Complex is Audubon's first globally important bird area. And it's important because we are a home to millions of migratory birds during the spring and the fall season. We're also home to a great number of birds during the winter months, as well as during the breeding season. But really, we are important, and Audubon is working there because of that habitat we provide migratory birds. And so Montezuma is 50,000 acres. That's twice the size of the city of Rochester for comparison. And it extends from the north end of Cayuga Lake all the way up towards Weedsport, out towards Wolcott, and then over to Clyde. So it's kind of that square configuration. And within that 50,000 acres, there's about 30,000 acres or so that is privately owned land that the state government, federal government, Audubon, other conservation organizations do not own, which means there's 20,000 acres of publicly accessible and managed land for people to come and enjoy bird watching, snowshoeing, mountain biking, cross-country skiing, you name it, recreationally, you can do it at Montezuma. And so because it's so large and we have all these conservation organizations working together like Audubon, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, and others, working with the State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we have just so many opportunities for folks. And this time of year, during the winter months, we're not doing so much of the habitat restoration projects that go on during the warmer months, right, but we are doing winter raptor surveys. So there's a great opportunity for folks to get outside, get involved, help us gather information about the bald eagles, red-tailed hawks, owls that are using Montezuma during the winter months, because that data will then help guide us in our conservation efforts as we go through the rest of this year.
So I'm curious, and this is something that you probably have to, that you're constantly thinking about. What are some of the overarching conservation trends that you guys have seen out there? Obviously, it was, from what I understand, a great year for bald eagle spottings, but just in general, is the trend upward every year, or does it seem to sort of pitch up and down, or is it pretty level, or how does that sort of shake out ordinarily?
In terms of bald eagles, we had a record number of bald eagle sightings during our midwinter bald eagle count, which was held just earlier in the year. 81 bald eagles were found, which blows away the previous record set 2 years ago. So there is a good trajectory in terms of bald eagles, and I think that's a testament to the conservation work that goes on there, the habitat restoration projects, and the community engagement. So that's all very positive. Yet there are still threats to Montezuma and habitats across the New York State in the Finger Lakes region. Invasive species is a major threat. These are plants, animals, diseases that are brought to this country and find their way here to Montezuma and the Finger Lakes that are not native to this part of the world. And so because they're not native, their checks and balances aren't here that keep them in check in their native lands. So we have plants such as Japanese honeysuckle, for example, which is a low-growing shrub, but if left unchecked, can just choke out a forest habitat. There's another plant called garlic mustard, which is also found there. In the waterways, there is hydrilla, of course, that is popped up in the Cayuga Lake Basin, which Audubon and the Finger Lakes Prism Group and Hobart William Smith are keeping close tabs on, and looking forward to working with them to engage more people, make sure that that plant does not choke out the waterways, because then you're talking about impacts to boating, fishing, swimming, and habitat degradation as well. So there are threats, but overall, because we are working so collaboratively with a number of organizations, we have so many volunteers and staff involved here at Montezuma, it's a thriving habitat for nearly 300 species of birds throughout the year.
Now, what are some of the efforts that you guys go through on a regular basis to combat some of those invasive species that you mentioned? Obviously, that's got to be part of the battle that you guys fight on a daily basis. So one way that we get the community involved and help us manage the habitats at Montezuma is through a volunteer program that we call MARSH.
and that stands for the Montezuma Alliance for the Restoration of Species and Habitats. It's a way for 200 or so people a year to get involved and remove invasive plants. But at the same time, while one group might be removing the plants, then we have other groups working to plant native vegetation once those invasives are pulled out. And then from there, what we do is we engage volunteers in bird surveys and other wildlife surveys to make sure that those birds and other wildlife are utilizing the newly restored habitats in a way that we think is beneficial. So if invasive species pulling and native planting isn't quite what folks are looking for, then we also have opportunities for them to collect native grassland and wetland seeds. And that's a very simple task, something that everybody can do. Whether you're 3 or 103, you can collect seed. It's very simple. And what we do with that seed then is we dry it out and then utilize that. We plant it or sow it in similar habitats to continue the restoration efforts. So there's something for everyone at Montezuma, whether it's a physically active pulling invasive species out, planting natives, or simply collecting the seed.
How would one go about getting involved in something like that? That's the next ask, because I'm sure there's somebody out there listening who's saying, that does sound interesting. How can I do it? Right.
It's great for scout groups, local community organizations, faith-based groups have all come out to us and helped in some way. It's great for high school students to get their community service hours in before graduation. Right. And so we have a Facebook page that is a great way to keep track of everything going on up at the Montezuma Audubon Center and across the Wetlands Complex. Also, of course, active on our website as well. But if you want to get in touch with me directly, you can just email montezuma@audubon.org. Simple way I can send folks more information about those volunteer opportunities, because they are going to be coming up as we get into the spring season. Usually around Earth Day is our first marsh event, and then that will continue just about every week right on through October. A couple of the great things about that volunteer marsh program is that we feed everyone lunch provided by the Friends of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, a great conservation partner here at Montezuma. And then we're also taking folks behind the gates in some cases, at the refuge and also on the DEC property. So these are areas that might not be familiar to folks. They're kind of off the beaten trail, so really a behind-the-scenes look at what Montezuma is all about, and so a couple of unique opportunities, through this Marsh Volunteer Program.
Now, obviously, beyond the bald eagles, what have been, as a bird enthusiast as you are, what have been some of the other sightings regionally, locally, that have caught your eye?
Yeah, over the last couple of months here during the winter season, our visitation has certainly decreased up at the Audubon Center, but that does not reflect the incredible bird life that we have here at Montezuma and across the Finger Lakes region. 3 species in particular really stand out to me, and they happen right here in Seneca Falls, down by the Finger Lakes Regional Airport and down by the Stone Quarry. Snowy owls, once again, have shown up down there. We had 4 snowy owl sightings down there. They continue to be there. These are wonderfully, just magnificent birds from the Great White North. They breed up in the Arctic tundra, and for now a 5th year in a row they have descended upon Montezuma and Seneca Falls. So just a wonderful white bird with some black specks on it. Stands about 2 feet tall with a 3-foot wingspan, just enormous. They're birds of open habitat, which is why they're drawn to airports and agricultural fields and wetland habitats that don't have trees. So snowy owl, tops of the list for sure. Also a visitor from the Great White North are the short-eared owls. These two only come down here for the winter months, and they feed on small mammals, meadow voles, and shrews, and they go back up to the Arctic tundra for breeding. But we've been seeing quite a few of them across Montezuma, including the DEC properties in Savannah, as well as down at the National Wildlife Refuge here in Seneca Falls. And then the third species that really caught my eye, and this one I saw for the first time last year when it was down here, is the gyrfalcon. Gyrfalcon is the largest falcon in the world. Typically resides up in the boreal forest of Canada or in the Arctic tundra. And for some reason, now for 2 years in a row, we've had it come down here to the Seneca Quarry here in Seneca Falls. So magnificent bird, really a unique opportunity for me and so many others to see a bird that really is not here very often.
So I wonder, because if these birds are not seen for a long period of time or multiple seasons, and then all of a sudden you see them again, does that trip something in your mind where you start asking yourself, okay, what was different about this year that made this happen, or is it just a complete by random chance and pattern out of the species and maybe what's happening where they're native from?
In terms of the snowy owls, we know that there's a strong connection between the small mammal population up in Canada and their occurrences down here in the lower 48 states. So 5 years ago, when we first started seeing them down here in the Northeast and Finger Lakes region and as far south as the Gulf Coast, we know that the lemming population, which are these small mammals, exploded up in Canada, and that caused a lot of food for snowy owls. So snowy owls were so much healthier. They produced more young, and more of those young survived.
Okay.
So there wasn't enough space for all of them to survive up there in Canada, and they had to push down here into the lower 48 states. Now that has continued over these past 5 years. We've had almost these rebound years in terms of snowy owl populations and sightings. So for 5 years in a row now, we've had snowy owls here, and checking some of my data across our Audubon network, snowy owls are seen this winter as far south as Virginia and North Carolina. So, and I think that's
historical reference, how unusual is that? Getting that far south?
Usually they hug the U.S.-Canada border.
Okay.
That's about as far south as they go. So having them even here in the Finger Lakes region is pretty unique. But to have them down in the mid-Atlantic states and certainly down in the Gulf Coast, that is unheard of, certainly within the last 50 years.
Now, I know we receive a lot of photos, and this year it seems like we have received more snowy owl photos than we have in the last couple winters anyway. So a lot of questions sort of surround the birds you see on water in the winter, waterfowls. Walk us through why, what species, what types of birds we're talking about, and sort of the background on how that works.
Yeah. The wetlands here, the Montezuma Wetlands complex, typically will freeze over during the winter months. And under normal winter conditions, like what we're having here, actually most of the Finger Lakes region freezes over solid. Yet the birds, a lot of birds, are still here. Nearly 24 species of ducks, geese, and swans can be found on 4 of our largest lakes here in the region. Lake Ontario, and then in terms of the Finger Lakes, you've got Cayuga, Seneca, and Canandaigua. Those are the 3 deepest Finger Lakes, and so they don't freeze over completely. Yes, the edges and the ends may freeze over, but the deepest portions remain ice-free. And that's where you get the massive concentrations of nearly 24 species of waterfowl. It's also a great place to find birds of prey, like bald eagles, northern harriers as well. So because of the lack of liquid water across the Finger Lakes region, the largest Finger Lakes in Lake Ontario are a magnet for these birds. So
why water? Why do they congregate on water? Is it a self-preservation thing where there are less aggressive species on land, and that's just how it works? Or
during the winter months, they still need to eat.
Right.
And those ducks, geese, and swans don't have ice augers to drill through ice and go fishing, as many of our ice anglers do this time of year. So they need liquid water, and that's the draw. They're eating vegetation, they're eating macroinvertebrates, small insects, and crustaceans in the waterway.
Now, before we jump into some of the programs that you have coming up this month, I wanted to, I was reading through some local publications, and I found a really interesting story that involved you. It was written by Gwendolyn Craig of the Auburn Citizen about Onondaga Lake, what's happened there. For those who might not know, talk to us about what's changed there and what kind of conservation effort has happened there to rehab that lake.
Onondaga Lake used to be the most polluted lake in the country. For 100+ years, industry and people dumped sewage and sludge and industrial chemicals into that lake. And essentially, it was a dead lake. Didn't have much in the way of fish. Bird life was non-existent. The whole food chain was disrupted. And about 10 years ago, Audubon started partnering with Honeywell, which is the company that bought out the company that actually did the polluting. Right. So it wasn't their fault, but they bought into it, and so they were on the hook for cleaning it up. And Audubon proudly partnered with Honeywell in addition to a number of industries and conservation organizations to clean up the lake. And all together, we have helped to conserve and restore about 100 acres of the worst wetland pollution and lake pollution that existed there. We've engaged hundreds of community members in the habitat restoration projects that have gone on there over these last 10 years, much like the Marsh Volunteer Program that we have. Right. That was kind of the flagship program that we brought to Onondaga Lake, and that turned into a success as well. Mm-hmm. So we went from a dead Onondaga Lake over in Syracuse now to a thriving lake that's also an Audubon important bird area and is now home to thousands of wintering waterfowl, just like our Finger Lakes are. Right. And folks can find about 36 species of bald eagles overwintering there because that lake also does not freeze over completely. So you get the massive numbers of birds there as well.
Now, okay, so for those who are looking for something to do the next few weeks, I believe you got an event coming up on the 10th and then another one around the 23rd, 24th.
Right.
Talk to us about what those two are and what anybody who shows up could expect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. On February 10th, we have a couple opportunities for folks to go snowshoeing. We're calling it the Sweetheart Snowshoe and Bird-Friendly Chocolate Tasting Event. And this is a really unique opportunity right around Valentine's Day to bring your loved one, your family member, friends are all welcome to join us either at 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Our Audubon naturalists are going to take folks out for a guided snowshoe. We have about 200 acres of property, forest, grassland, wetland, habitat, open water up there at the Audubon Center as well. So we'll be looking at the bird life. We'll also be reading the mammal tracks in the snow and really enjoy a really nice snowshoe. So folks can bring their own snowshoes, or we have snowshoes available to rent up there. After that guided snowshoe, we're going to welcome everyone back in the warm, friendly confines of the Audubon Center and warm up with some chocolate. Right. So these are bird-friendly chocolates, and what makes them bird-friendly is that the chocolate is grown sustainably in Central and South America. And now the connection between Audubon and chocolate is that many of our birds that breed here in the late spring and the summer months go down to these same regions for the winter. Right. And so if we can change the mindset of folks and help them to understand that consumer activities and what we purchase can actually benefit birds and the habitats that they need to survive, that's a wonderful thing. And so we're going to be offering 6 different types of chocolates that can be bought very easily at local grocery stores right here in the Finger Lakes region. And we're going to talk more about that connection between Audubon, birds, and chocolate and how it's produced. So it's going to be a really unique program. We've got 2 different opportunities for folks, both at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on Saturday, February 10th.
And is that both of the events, or is that just the first one? So we have the second event. It looks like Saturday.
Right, Saturday,
24th,
February
1 to 4.
24th, yep. So very happy that we're partnering with Fleur de Lis Brewworks right here in Seneca Falls, a brand new brewery right here in town, working with Jennifer and that whole crew down there. They're doing a great job. And so what we're going to offer is a bird, binocs, and beers program at 1 o'clock. Very similar to the Sweetheart Snowshoe, where we're going to take folks out for a guided snowshoe right at the brewery. They have some wonderful forest habitat, some open field habitat, and a little stream run through the property. So no doubt will be a lot of songbirds there. Probably see some hawks or maybe some eagles up in the sky. After that guided snowshoe, we're going to go inside the brewery for a few flights. So we're going to have beer tastings, in addition to some local cheese that's going to be offered and some other food for our guests. And then we're going to wrap it all up with the live bird of prey presentation. So Dana Ford from Braddock Bay Raptor Research is going to be coming out from Rochester with 5 or 6 different birds of prey for an indoor program, just for our guests during this program. So a really unique opportunity. We've done many of these types of programs at wineries throughout the Finger Lakes, and now branching out to the breweries that are here as well. So there is a fee to cover expenses and staff time for these, and to help support our conservation and environmental education programs. And folks can find more of all these programs and so many more on our website, which is ny.audubon.org/Montezuma.
Now, I have to ask, before we get you out of here, when, as we move closer to spring and look forward to spring, when do some of the spring and summer birds that we're used to seeing in the region start to make their way back and start to pop up?
Yeah. Usually we eye March as the time that the weather changes. We get slightly warmer conditions. The snow starts to melt away. The first wave of birds coming in will be the waterfowl. And it's no exaggeration to say that 1 million ducks, geese, and swans are going to be passing overhead and utilizing the marshes at Montezuma and across the Finger Lakes. People are probably familiar with the snow geese, large numbers of white birds. We counted 500,000 snow geese on 2 marshes alone at Montezuma last year. So very impressive numbers. So March is a great time to start looking for birds and getting outside and exploring. April and May are great times to see the small birds, the songbirds, the warblers, vireos, orioles, hummingbirds that are currently down in Central and South America, and they'll start coming back up then. So we're going to be offering a lot of tours this spring and summer, a lot of opportunities for families and adults and school children to get involved in Montezuma, experience it, and even help us preserve that habitat for them. And of course, at the same time, we're also preserving the vital natural resources that we need as well.
Absolutely. Well, really appreciate you coming in. I'm sure we'll be having you back again as we get into spring, when you guys have even more events to talk about. Always great to see what you guys are doing, and really great to see you doing so much out there for something that is really important for the region as a whole.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
That's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Chris, our listeners, and of course FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304, and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.